What goes into the engineering of a crisis?
Let's talk specifically. Which crisis?
Let's talk about
Egypt?
the one you just mentioned, the crisis in Greece, for example.
Oh, okay. That is a very interesting one. Just at the time it erupted, the Chinese, I'm talking now November 2009, the Chinese central bank was talking about being very upset with the fiscal lack of control of Washington and the deficits, $1 trillion plus per year, as far as the eye can see, and said that it's going to start looking around for other options to invest Chinese trade surpluses. Well, the only other option that's credible at this point is of course, the euro, which was slowly emerging as a substitute for the dollar as central bank reserve. And I think something like 25% of central bank reserves for the Greek crisis were in euros, and 66% or so were in dollars. The rest were in diverse currencies. So at just that point, what happens when the dollar? Everybody, leading economists all around the world, are predicting a dollar free fall because the situation is so desperate. And just at that point, the Papandreou government announces that Greece has a 14% to GDP fiscal deficit in the budget, and that the previous conservative governments had lied, and they had hidden the debt with help of Goldman Sachs in 2002 to allow Greece to qualify to enter the euro currency zone with a 3% deficit to GDP. So using derivatives and all sorts of things. So that was the first clue. Goldman Sachs was on the inside of this, enabling the fraud or the deception back almost 10 years ago.
Mr. Engdahl, we have to interrupt you just for a moment to take this quick commercial break for a message from our sponsors, and we'd love to get back to this and hear more what you have to say about the engineering of a crisis. You're listening to Food Integrity Now. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Food Integrity Now. Our guest today, F. William Engdahl. Before the break, Mr. Engdahl was discussing with us the engineering of a crisis, specifically the crisis that was engineered in Greece and Goldman Sachs' involvement in that crisis. Mr. Engdahl, would you please continue?
Sure. The point about this is that it's a war, financial warfare, economic warfare between the dollar as reserve currency and the euro as a potential replacement. That's a geopolitical game of the highest stakes, because if the U.S. loses that dollar reserve role, then the Chinese de facto no longer will be financing, through their buying of U.S. government debt, will be financing the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places that are also against Chinese state interest. But the point about the Greek crisis is just at the moment the dollar was about to go into free fall, suddenly all eyes are focused on Greece and the Greek crisis being a euro crisis. So the pundits in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Anglo-American financial media really started focusing on this. And there are huge weaknesses in the euro, there's no question about it, but the 800-pound gorilla in the China shop is the American dollar and not the euro. But for a short period of time, all eyes were turned on the euro, and then George Soros and 3 or 4 of the largest hedge funds in the world had a nice little coffee chat in the apartment of one of them in New York City in February of 2010, where they talked about the Greek crisis. Now, I don't have to be a fly on the wall to imagine that they came to a certain consensus strategy to use their combined muscle to make a massive attack on Greece and the euro, and that drove the interest rate sky high. And at that point, Standard & Poor's downgraded at just the point where the governments of the European Union, Germany, France, and the other governments announced agreement on an emergency rescue package for Greece and other potential countries like Portugal. Just at that day, Standard & Poor's downgraded the sovereign debt of Greece by 3 notches. Now, that meant Greece debt was now junk. And if you know anything about the bond markets, pension funds are forbidden to hold junk. They have to hold AAA quality or any grade above junk. Otherwise, they are forbidden. So that forced a massive sell-off of Greek debt, which was the plan. Then Bernanke chimes in, the Federal Reserve chairman, and starts talking about the unviable euro and so forth. So it was just a massive desperation attack from the dollar faction against the euro. It's not over yet by any means, by the way. It's the next contest will come in March when the European heads of state meet to talk about a proposal from Germany and France to restructure this whole Euroland to give an economic coordination element.
And what are you anticipating with that? What?
It's unclear.
Okay.
It's too early to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll be a big fight.
So, what was the benefit of postponing the inevitable slide of the dollar by having the Greek market fall first?
Well, they're stalling for time and hoping that they can destabilize Europe enough that the U.S. will look good by comparison. I mean, so far it's kind of worked, but really intelligent fund managers that I know in Switzerland and Germany and in London and so forth see right through this facade. See that the U.S. economy is a basket case, not an economy in recovery.
I want to shift to another area of the country if you have any comments on Egypt and what you think is happening there, and if you feel like this crisis is being orchestrated and why.
The Egypt revolution, some people in Washington are calling it creative destruction. This goes back to a stratagem that was unveiled by the Bush administration. It actually has its origins about 10 years earlier, but George W. Bush, after 9/11, unveiled a plan in front of the G8 countries called the Greater Middle East Project. And the map of the Greater Middle East Project that Bush was talking about went literally from Morocco or Gibraltar on the Atlantic coast of North Africa all the way across through the Middle East, up through Central Asia, and directly to the borders of China on Tibet. And as many irate Arabs, including Hosni Mubarak and the King of Saudi Arabia at the time, pointed out, this is not a greater Middle East. This is not a homogeneous cultural zone. This has huge differences in economic levels and cultural levels and everything else. And for the U.S. to make that a target for economic liberal reforms were the terms that they use. But what they want to do is break the economies open and give them IMF shock therapy like they did with Poland after 1991 or many of the Eastern European economies.
What is
so that
IMF?
Western corporations could come in and loot them and buy their assets for a dime on the dollar.
William, can you explain what IMF therapy? What did you mean by that?